All right, hello everybody. I wanted to do the same thing I did before the last test for Unit 1. I gave you a quick summary explanation of each of the Supreme Court cases involved so far in the unit. So I'm going to do that again here. So it's going to be the two cases, Marbury versus Madison and Baker versus Carr, just to make sure we all have a really good understanding of these two required court. So we start with Marbury, probably the more familiar of the two. And when you did your work, I'm just going to make sure that everybody understands the circumstances and what happened. So, in essence, the idea here was that if you remember from last year, the election of 1800 was very, very much contested. And in the end, it ended up being, if you remember, Jefferson and Aaron Burr from the same party being tied with the amount of electoral votes. Now, the way the system worked, they had to modify it, and they did it with the 12th Amendment to change so that votes, you had specific electoral votes for president and specific ones for vice president. That was not the way it was initially. So it resulted in this issue, and remember, it took 30 some votes in the House to give Jefferson the nod to become president. But also, if you remember, the election of 1800 was the first time there was an actual shift of power, the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. And at that time, the new Congress didn't start till something like March of the next year. So the election was in November, and the new Congress wouldn't take effect, wouldn't go into office until March. Now it's January 3rd, so it's a much shorter time. But all of that time, that meant that Adams was still president, and as the president was inaugurated also later on, Adams was still president, and the Federalists were in charge of Congress. And so what they did was they decided that they would make a whole bunch of court appointments with lifetime tenure so they could then fill them, and then at least they'd still control the judiciary branch. The Federalists were not going to be in control of the legislature or the presidency. So they decided to do this. This is called the Midnight Judges, is what it's called. Well, what happened was is they did this and they filled them, but they didn't get them all delivered. The commissions delivered. And in that day and age, the law said that the Secretary of State was responsible for delivering these commissions. So when the old Secretary of State goes out and the new Secretary of State, James Madison, comes in, Jefferson's new Secretary of State, he essentially has a pile of commissions on his desk to deliver, and he doesn't do that. He's like, I'm not doing this. I'm not delivering these. They're for Federalists. So Mr. Marbury, William Marbury, I believe his name was, decided that he knew he was going to get one. He knew, I mean, everybody knew they were going to get their commissions, and he decided that he was going to try to force James Madison to deliver it. And the way he went about it is, now this is where the case comes in. The Judiciary Act of 1789 actually had a section, and you had it in your work, Section 13, that said if you are looking for a writ of mandamus, which is a writ or an order from the judicial branch telling a government official to do their job. So he wanted the court to tell Madison to deliver the commission because that's his job. And the Judiciary Act of 1789 said you go to the Supreme Court to get this done. Well, there's the problem that was determined. So the court had to decide if an act of legislation, which is what the Judiciary Act was, could add to the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The original jurisdiction where you start is listed in the Constitution for the Supreme Court. That's it. So what the decision in the case was is you cannot add to that by an act of legislation. The only way if you want to add to the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, you're going to have to do it with a constitutional amendment. You can't just add something willy-nilly with an act of legislation, and that's what the Supreme Court ruled. So what it set up then, and this is the biggest issue out of it, is sets up judicial review. They had not really set that up before. It set up the idea, and if you read the assignment, you read some of the decision, and it said, John Marshall said that it's the job of the Supreme Court to determine what the law is and what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. So judicial review is set up with this case. The most important part of this is judicial review being set up. Now, the idea is basically what they said, and they also said, hey, Marbury deserves his commission, but he came to the wrong place. So that's the essence of, that's the really nitty gritty of the decision. The big idea is judicial review. The nitty gritty is, yeah, he deserves it, but he came to the wrong place. We can't help you. So that's the idea. So you can see, you got to make sure you know the year. You got to understand those terms. Writ of mandamus, judicial review, jurisdiction, and the Judiciary Act. And again, the biggest idea: establish the power of judicial review. All right, let's move on to Baker versus Carr. A little bit of a different style, different case. So this is from 1961, 1962 time frame. And what you end up having here is, then you read the idea, and you've got it. Tennessee hadn't changed their internal for their legislature, had changed their districts in 50 some years. They were supposed to do it every 10 years, but they didn't do it. And what ends up happening is that more people start moving to the cities, and so the places where the cities are have larger numbers of population. The rural areas have smaller numbers of population, but they're all represented by one representative in each of their things. So basically, you had one representative for 10,000 people here, and one representative for 500 people here. And Mr. Baker, mayor of Nashville, I believe, he said he decided that he was going to sue to say, hey, you've got to do this because my vote's not counting. I'm not counted as equally as others. And the initial result, of course, was the district court, circuit court said, no, we're not getting involved. This is political questions, and that's the issue of this case, is the idea of political questions. That's a political issue with your legislature. We're not going to get involved. And it's the way that they've been operating for a very long time. So what happened here is the Supreme Court decided to take the case, and they overturned that precedent. Remember, you're supposed to do things the way they are in the past, the idea of precedent and stare decisis from the lecture. And what happens is that the Supreme Court, of course, can change that. The Supreme Court did 6-2. They ruled. Then the six said that yes, we can do this. Now they said they're not going to set them up. They're not going to say what the solution is, but they're going to say that was unconstitutional what they had done. It violated the 14th Amendment, and the idea of one person, one vote is where this comes from. So the legislative districts are going to have to be made more even. And again, they're not deciding it. They're not saying do it. They're just telling the district court, now here's the new rules. Now you decide what to do. So this is the idea here. They've added some of these political questions, and we'll see more of this when we talk more about gerrymandering and the setting up of actual other congressional districts at the national level. We'll talk about this again and whether or not they are political questions or not. So the idea, again, it's political questions is the issue. And they decided that they would change, and they could look at internal legislative districts in a state if they wanted to do that. So that's the whole idea for Baker versus Carr. So hopefully you've got a good idea. Make sure you check this out again before you take the quiz and the test, and we'll see you next time around. Good luck on the quiz and the test.